Sandhya Shantari Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadhaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishvedeva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shantireti Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, may there be peace on earth. May there be peace in heaven. May there be peace in the waters, the herbs, the plants. May peace abide amongst the gods. May peace pervade the universe. May that peace, real peace, be ours. Well, it is a real pleasure to be with you. The universal prescription for well-being. And I'm going to begin this talk by telling you all the bad news first. Don't worry, it'll be over shortly. The bad news is that never before has our society been so stressed, so depressed, so unhappy. Anxiety disorders are among the most common mental illness in the United States. About 40 million Americans, that's 18% of us, have experienced anxiety disorders in any given year. And about 8% children and teenagers experience anxiety disorders before the age of 21. And depression isn't far behind. 16.2 million adults in the United States, that's 6.7% of all adults, have experienced a major depressive episode in the past year. And depression is one of the 6 top causes of disability in the workplace. According to the American Medical Association, the Psychological Association, 65% of the United States employees cite work as a significant source of their stress, and more than 1/3 report chronic work stress. It's heartbreaking that the estimate of the job stress costs the United States industry $300 billion a year. So many factors contribute to this overall situation. A weakened economy in some places of this country right now, job insecurity, a hectic family life. A senior Swami in our order once told me, "You Americans are living many lifetimes in one life." When we walk down the street today, we have 300 times more stimuli coming at us than we would if we had walked on the same street 100 years ago. Swami Vivekananda foresaw the seeds of a swelling, fast-paced economy and city life when he came to this country. Then it was the scientific industrial revolution. And now it's the digital revolution, modernizing society and rewiring our brains. We can't assimilate the information glut. That's firsthand experience you've all experienced. We are mesmerized by our virtual pastimes, our digital communications, and they replace real company and real conversations in real time. So that's our situation. Neuroscientists tell us that we're not prepared for the effects of digital media, the revolution that is taking place, that is rewiring our brains. So Vivekananda, we turn to him, and he encapsulated this problem. He said, We are caught, though we came to catch. We came to enjoy, we are being enjoyed. We came to rule, we are being ruled. We came to work, we are being worked. We are being worked upon by other minds, and we are always struggling to work on other minds. We want to enjoy the pleasures of life, and they eat into our vitals. We want to get everything from nature, but we find in the long run that nature takes everything from us, depletes us, and casts us aside. So what is the solution? Well, we desperately turn to nature and to meditation, hoping that those will solve our problems and calm the mind. Vivekananda, after his first visit to the West, gave the solution to the problem. There was a young man in Bengal who came to him and asked desperately, "Sir, when I sit in meditation, shut the door of my room and close my eyes as long as I can't find peace of mind. Can you show me the way?" And Vivekananda, with a voice full of sympathy, said, "My boy, if you take my word, you will first of all have to open the door of your room and look around instead of closing your eyes. There are hundreds of poor and helpless people in the neighborhood of your house. Them you will have to serve to the best of your ability. He who is ill and has no one to look after him, for him you will have to give medicine and diet and nurse him. He who has nothing to eat, you will have to feed him. He who is ignorant, you will have to teach him. My advice to you is that if you want peace of mind, you will have to serve others in this way as well as you can." So studies show us that social service is a universal prescription for well-being. So we ask why and how. In the field of psychology, Alfred Adler, the founder of individual psychology, formulated service as a therapeutic model. He emphasized a holistic outlook to mental health, and he advocated social service as a prescription for better mental health. He said individuals must look outside themselves and develop social and community relationships in the form of service. Adler knew that persons can't be understood as a collection of parts, but must be viewed as a whole. So the Adlerian perspective is love, society, work, spirituality, and self. These are all relational ones. He explained there are two kinds of people. Two kinds. One who feels purposeful and useful in life. That person is content with life. The other, who feels without purpose or use, leads to discouragement and depression. All of you are familiar with all of the many studies that are out now that show that givers tend to be happier people. George Moll, MD, PhD, head of the Door Institute for Research and Education in Brazil, explained that research shows altruism stimulates the same pleasure centers in the brain as sugar and cocaine. Researchers at the University of Wisconsin, they were the first to introduce brain scans. Mathieu Ricard, the Tibetan monk and former molecular geneticist, was hooked up to brain scans, and this 66-year-old's brain produced a level of gamma waves linked to consciousness, attention, learning, and memory never before reported in neuroscience. Meditation, these brain researchers have found, on compassion can alter the brain and improve people's happiness, which we know today as neuroplasticity. Ricard said, "It's a wonderful area of research because it shows that meditation is not just blissing out under a mango tree, but it completely changes your brain and therefore changes what you are." So if meditation on compassion, which is one type of karma yoga, can produce happiness, why can't selfless service do the same, which is meditation on compassion in action? So why and how? First, we have to ask, what is compassion? By just saying it, can we be it? Well, the answer is no and yes. Words themselves paint pictures and act on our brain. Compassion, love, friends, these words soothe our nerves and generate a feeling of well-being, whereas words like war, terrorism, crime increase our heart rate and blood pressure. But how many of us can measure up to the Dalai Lama's definition of compassion when he said, "Remember that the best relationship is one in which your love for each other exceeds your need for each other." Vivekananda said, "Through the power of love, the senses become finer and higher." The perfect love is very rare in human relation, for human love is almost always interdependent and mutual. But Vedanta also postulates that all love is a shadow of divine love. Again, Vivekananda states, "Love and ask nothing. Love and look for nothing further. Love and forget all the isms. The very idea of God is love. Seeing a cat loving her kittens stand and pray, God has become manifest there. Literally believe this, for we can see God everywhere." To understand why we have to deep dive into the metaphysical level of the universe. Religion says there is a heart to the universe. The divine incarnation comes from the heart of God, the loving, grace-filled part of God. Not the God of the cosmic order, not the God as a maintainer of justice, not the God as creator and destroyer of the universe, not the God as the giver of the fruits of karma, but God of love incarnate. So this revelation is Vedanta's philosophical basis of compassion. Love is rooted in and synonymous with God the Absolute. Satchit Ananda. Let's deconstruct the word. Sat. The existence through which everything exists. We read in the Hebrew Bible, "Before Abraham was, I am." Chid, consciousness. The consciousness that contains all knowledge. St. Paul in Acts, "In him we live, move, and have our being." Ananda, bliss, the peace that passeth all understanding. Swami Sarvagatananda, wonderful and disciple of Swami Akhandananda, and former head of the Boston and Providence Centers, once told me, Chid is loving consciousness. Not just consciousness, but loving consciousness. A seer who has that experience sees light, and that light is loving consciousness. So this is compassion in its highest sense, wisdom and compassion go together. Ananda is this bliss-filled cosmic creation. We read in our Upanishads, the Taittiriya Upanishad, in joy springs this universe, in joy dwells this universe, in joy dissolves this universe. So can we, you and I, experience this Ananda, this loving consciousness, this infinite compassion? Yes, our teachers tell us, by realizing the Atman, one with Brahman. By deepening and expanding our human love, the shadow of divine love, our love for someone or something is an unknowing attraction to the Atman. We find that in the Pravrajika Upanishad, when Yajnavalkya tells Maitreyi, it is not for the sake of the husband that the husband is dear, but for the sake of the self. It is not for the sake of the wife that the wife is dear, but for the sake of the self. It is not for the sake of the creatures that the creatures are dear, but for the sake of the self. So this creation itself that we see around us gives birth to compassion. Again, what is compassion? It's come plus passion. It means feeling with, not from the outside, but from the inside. The Latin word means co-suffering. It indicates emotional capacities of empathy and sympathy, which are part of love itself. We cannot feel compassion without love. So it is a source of deeper interconnectivity with all, reaching its pinnacle in the feeling of oneness with all. It is the foundation of the highest principles of philosophy, the laws of society, personhood, ethics, or dharma, of what it means to be a human being. So the source of compassion is creation. Rumi, the Sufi poet, wrote, if there had not been love, how would there have been existence? The Aitareya Upanishad, before creation, all that existed was the self, and the self alone. Nothing else was. Then the self thought, let me send forth the worlds. So from the highest non-dualistic standpoint, our first misconception is the sense of other. Now there are 4 Mahavakyas in our tradition that reclaim the unity of existence. And these are the revelations of the nature of the self. Tat Tvamasi, that thou art. Thou art the self, one with Brahman. I am Atma Brahma. The self is Brahman. Prajnanam Brahma, pure consciousness is Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. One of our senior monks, Swami Bhajanananda, said there's a 5th Mahavakya. We find it in John. God is love. And in the Ishu Upanishad, we read, in the heart of all things, of whatever there is in the universe, dwells the Lord. He alone is the reality. So this reality is Brahman, omniscient, omnipresent, all-pervading, and immanent. Within each one of us, the Atman. He who sees all beings in the self and the self in all beings hates none. Christ said, love thy neighbor as thyself. The same self exists within all. So the practical application of Vedanta's premise of loving consciousness as a root and the reality of the universe can be found in selfless service, serving others as the self, compassion in action. For in trying to see and serve others as divine, ultimately we see and serve our own self in the other. In trying to see and serve others as divine, ultimately we see and serve our own self in the other. We find our own true nature, the Atman, bliss itself, within ourself and within others. So how to do so? First, we have to aspire to be compassion itself. And then we must strive to be and become. Practice our aspiration. How? By infusing our actions with our aspiration, our ideal. You see, this karma yoga is not about doing. It's a mental job. By doing and performing this action, this pure motive we have injected within ourselves, deep into our body and mind, it pervades us. We become transformed. And when we see examples of this, it gives us thrills. There's a special fragrance about a true karma yogi or yogini. So to put compassion into action, selfless service, we try to serve the self selflessly, without ego. And in so doing, we return to our source, our true home, our one self in all. And that is why it fills us with happiness and joy. Our home is loving consciousness. So, the ramifications of this are profound and vast. The self is one, the Isha Upanishad tells us, one without a second. There is no multiplicity whatsoever. And in creation, this world of multiplicity, the self is all. The self is everywhere. One consciousness pervades all, also, the Isha Upanishad tells us. Oh, this is a radical philosophy. This is a radical religion. This is an outrageous truth. Each being is not just a part, but the whole of infinite reality. The whole universe is but a speck in the ocean of being, which each of us is. And by approaching thus, even meagerly, through the act of selfless service, no wonder we feel joy. How much more so when we serve knowingly. So what does this mean? To serve and address the self in others, we are communing with the whole of infinite reality. So service, no matter how secular or sacred, is a prescription for our well-being and can bring us to the brink of bliss itself. So where do we start? We start with the practice of love, bhakti yoga. This yoga leads us back to our source. By loving our true original nature, both within ourselves and within others. Now, most of us know there are 5 types of human love. There's the Shanta, the peaceful love, like a child has when it turns to its father for all its wants, protection, food, etc. Dasya, the love that inspires us to serve and dominates all other feelings. Vatsalya, the motherly love where God is a child, like the baby Krishna or the baby Jesus. There's no element of fear there. Then there's Sakya, the love of friends, equals, playmates. Christ the shepherd, Krishna, Arjuna's friend on the battlefield. And then there's Madhura, the love of husband and wife, love for love's sake, the beloved one. Vivekananda tells us, the highest love is the love that is sexless, for it is perfect unity that is expressed in the highest love. It is therefore only in spirit that union is possible. So the practice of love, compassion, is karma yoga. It's the path of action. And there are 3 stages. There's work and worship, then there's work as worship, and then there is work is worship. Work and worship are 2 acts that are separate. Our service is an outward activity. We're doing good to others in the world. Nothing wrong with that. And worship is strictly an inward activity, doing good to oneself, doing worship in the temple or our church. And then we begin to broaden our understanding. And we begin to work as worship. This was Vivekananda's ideal of service in daily life, where we attempt to decompartmentalize the secular and the sacred. We try to see the living God in those served. And we're vigilant about our motive and self-interest. See, mindfulness is also a part of karma yoga. Karma yoga, some say, is the most difficult of all yogas. And then finally there's the culmination where our work is worship, where we see Brahman everywhere as a living spirit, and we automatically cherish others as the living God. We lose our sense of the small self by pulling off the mask of the other. We see the other as a manifestation of divinity, the same divinity that dwells within myself, yourself. So this seva, this service, serving our beloved in the form of other, is an expression of loving another as our own self, where we shift the center of focus from the giver to the receiver. And the final goal surpasses empathy. We feel fulfilled and the recipient feels elevated. That's true karma yoga. I'd like to share with you an example of this. In 1949, Swami Pravrajika and some of our senior nuns who have passed away went to India. And Swami Pravrajika met an old man in Vishnupur who had met Sri Ramakrishna. The young boy's sister was married to someone near Kamapakur, and he had gone with his sister by bullock cart for the marriage, and they had stopped at Haldapakur. The boy became thirsty and he went to the pond alone, and Sri Ramakrishna stood by a tree nearby, holding the branch. The boy didn't know how to drink water without a cup. Sri Ramakrishna cupped his hands. He said, "Now you drink." And he talked with the boy. He told him to think of him whenever he was in difficulty. And suddenly his sister came running and snatched the boy away from Sri Ramakrishna, who was known as the Mad Gadai. The boy forgot the whole episode, but later in life, when he had some troubles, whenever he thought of the Mad Gadai, Sri Ramakrishna appeared to him, and his problems were solved. Only afterwards did he learn that Sri Ramakrishna and the Mad Gadai were one and the same. In his old age, he would sit under a tree and chant Jai Sri Ramakrishna in ecstasy. This is a supreme example of how karma yoga, selfless action, elevates the receiver. Swami Vivekananda learned from Sri Ramakrishna how Satchidananda is the underlying unity of all existence. It translates into practice through social service. And Vivekananda introduced this to the Ramakrishna mission. It happened one day when Sri Ramakrishna was seated in his room, surrounded by his disciples, and Naran, the future Vivekananda, was present. And Ramakrishna was asked to describe the practices of Vaishnavism, the followers of Krishna. He said, repeat the name of the Lord, show compassion for all creatures, serve devotees. But then suddenly, he repeated compassion for all creatures, and he went into samadhi. When he returned to semi-consciousness, he said, compassion for all creatures? Who am I to show compassion to others? Not compassion for man, but service to him as a manifestation of God. Now, there were many people in the room, but it was only Naran who stepped outside the room, who said, I will proclaim this wonderful truth to the world. To see God in every being and serve, not as philanthropy, but as worship. So the premise of karma yoga as service and its realization is, in the words of Vivekananda, God is love and love is God, and God is everywhere. This unity of existence. This service to others reminds and reorients us to the truth of the interconnectivity with all beings. We enter the field of action as opposed to mere thought. So our acts of service drive that truth home by physically affirming it through our actions. The practice is self-purification through our love. We start with forgiveness, forbearance, ahimsa, loving kindness, selfless service. And then as our ego ripens, we expand our sense of self to include the whole world, not by working feverishly, but by working devotedly. We see all creation, all beings, reside within our heart, the abode of God, which is love. King Janaka said, I am indeed in all beings, and all beings are in me. This revelation is the wisdom of compassion, the experience of oneness. So waking up means assimilating this truth, to think it, practice it, experience it, by living it through the field of action. But what are the challenges? How can we serve so we feel fulfilled and the recipient feels elevated? So a radical change is needed to shift our center of focus from the giver to the receiver. But without meditation, we forget who it is we are working for. We become ego involved. Karma yoga becomes karma, and it ceases to be transformative. So we must always remain vigilant, mindfulness in action, and maintain our spiritual practices. Vivekananda reminds us, we have no right to expect anything in return for our service. He says, when you give something to a man and expect nothing, do not even expect the man to be grateful. His ingratitude will not tell upon you because you never expected anything. You never thought you had any right to anything in the way of a return. You gave him what he deserved. His own karma got it for him. Your karma made you the carrier thereof. Why should you be proud of having given away anything? You are the porter that carried the money or other kind of gift, and the world deserved it by its own karma. Where is then the reason for pride in you? I'd like to end, we're ending a little early, but I'd like to end with a beautiful example of karma yoga that I witnessed here in Hollywood several years ago, one January. It was at a 7-Eleven nearby. I had driven a devotee there to get cash from an ATM machine. Again, it was dark. And as she went in, I sat in the car in the dark, and a homeless man was standing by a garbage bin, talking to himself. He was mentally ill and homeless. People came and went through the doors of the 7-Eleven. They passed him by without looking at him. But he continued to stand there in the cold. And suddenly a car drove up. A man got out, and he went up to the homeless man and handed him a roll of bills. And in a voice as though talking to a friend, he said, "Take care and stay warm." That was all. Then he got back in his car and he drove away, an act of random kindness. The homeless man was as astonished as I was. He stared at those bills in his hands and walked away into the night. I will never forget that act of charity. Delivered in the dark, outside a 7-Eleven. It was an act of greatness that I was blessed to witness. So in conclusion, the selfless service is therapy because it bestows us with compassion and joy. Why? By serving others as ourself, this yoga leads us on the non-dual path back to our true abode, that light of loving consciousness within. Thank you. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamadachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman floweth all, yet still it remains the same. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all.